Hello and welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad Tehami. Now, Pakistan's ranking on the Corruption Perception Index, that is known as CPI, has improved by 7 spots from 140 that was back in 2022 to 133 in the year 2023. And now, when we talk about the Transparency International, Pakistan's chairman, Justice retired Zia Pervez, he has talked about this particular improvement in the ranking of Pakistan and the score of Pakistan on this corruption perception index. Let me quote him. He says that it is encouraging to note that Pakistan's score on CPI 2023 has improved by 2 points from 27 in CPI 2022 to 29 in CPI 2023. And Pakistan's rank has improved by 7 positions from 140 in CPI 2022 to 133 in CPI 2023. Now, he goes on to say that this reflects on the anti-corruption efforts taken by the different pillars of the state, due to which Pakistan has witnessed an improvement in the CPI 2023. The government policies aimed at better governance and effective enforcement of the laws is expected to yield positive results in the future, as well as through implementation of the recommendations of Transparency International Berlin. Now, there are certain recommendations have been made by this particular watchdog. Let me quote that one also. What are those recommendations? Transparency International calls on governments to give justice systems the independence, resources and transparency needed to effectively punish all corruption offences and provide checks and balances on power. Where necessary, they must also introduce better procedures and laws to help justice institutions shield themselves from the target corrupt acts. Also, when we talk about this particular CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, it's basically is used to rank 180 countries and territories by their perceived level of public sector corruption, according to experts and business people. It basically relies on 13 independent data sources. It uses a scale of 0 to 100. Now, when we talk about this particular scale, 0 actually signifies that if a country lies closer to 0, that is high on corruption, as more corruption happens there. And when we talk about 100, it shows that the country is very clean. Now, according to the report, the country's ranking, when we talk about Pakistan, it was 133. Again, when we talk about its global perception, there is a global outlook regarding this particular thing also, which goes on to say that CPI score dropped from 40 in 2022 to 39 in 2023. When we specifically talk about India, globally it says that 2023 CPI shows that most countries have made little to no progress in tackling public sector corruption. CPI global average remains unchanged at 43 for the 12th year in a row, with more than 2/3 of the countries scoring below 50. In today's program, we are going to talk about this particular phenomenon of corruption and what basically this particular report of Transparency International signify. What is this particular corruption perception index, and what's the importance of it? Does it affect actually the policy making when it talks about various states and ranks them on that particular scale of 0 to 100? And to understand all these aspects related to this particular report, related to this particular phenomenon, and to this particular index, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Khalique, his senior analyst. Mr. Khalique, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Nasir Iqbal. He's head at the Macro Policy Lab, Pakistan Institute of Developmental Economics. Dr. Iqbal, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. On Skype, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Niaz Murtaza. He's senior analyst. Dr. Murtaza, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. If both of you gentlemen allow me, let me begin the discussion with Dr. Murtaza. Dr. Murtaza, let's start from the very basics for the general understanding and the awareness of the common man. When we talk about this particular corruption perception index. It is always talked about so much. So when a common man tries to understand what this basically is, could you shed a little bit of light that what basically this index is, what does it signify, what is the importance associated with it?
Thank you very much for inviting me for this very important discussion. I think the first thing that common people must understand is that this perception index, it's put out not by the UN, but there is an international NGO in Germany called Transparency International. So it's a civil society group. The second thing is that as the name says, it's the corruption perception index. So it doesn't measure corruption directly. Obviously, there's no, way to measure corruption directly because it's usually hidden and secretive. So nobody has really invented an index which directly measures index. It measures people's perceptions. And who are these perceptions? As you had mentioned, there are like 13 different sources of information that they use. So it means that, this is a secondary index which is built on 13 other indexes which collect more primary data. So what kind of primary data do these other institutes measure? They talk to, say, business people, they talk to travelers, they talk to policymakers and so on, people who study issues related to corruption, or people who are more likely to experience issues of corruption, like big businessmen and so on. So it measures their index, their perception. So if Pakistan's position has improved, it's about perception rather than corruption itself. Then the second thing is
Dr. Mirza, please hold your thought over here. I'll come back to you when we talk
Sure.
about that improvement in the ranking of Pakistan on this particular corruption perception index. Now, let me proceed with the discussion. Mr. Khalique, what's your understanding? We'll talk about this particular as Dr. Niaz Murtaza has shed light on what basically this index is. It's basically the perception of corruption happening, not the corruption index itself, the real corruption. So it basically is derived from the other primary sources. We're getting the primary data from 13 different sources. What's your understanding of it?
I think, thank you very much. First of all, I think it is very important to speak about these fundamental issues, and I'm glad that PTV World is doing this program and you're very sort of ably handling it. But let me say in the first place that the fundamental structural issues of Pakistan have to do with the way our economy is structured, is managed, and corruption for me, like many other people think, is not the primary issue that Pakistan faces. Capitalism as an economic system and monopoly capitalism, for sure, monopolistic capitalism as we call it, is corrupt to the hilt. Monopolistic capitalism anywhere in the world, particularly in the neoliberal world where we are living, but even earlier, cannot function without corrupt practices. So I think that is something that we need to understand. And then, of course, I mean, financial corruption is something that bothers all of us because it hits the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable are they take the brunt for it, but it hits all different sections of society and all classes of people. But I'm not very, I mean, it's a good thing that Pakistan has actually moved up the financial corruption scale. It is largely about financial corruption because there is no intellectual corruption index in the world as yet. This is, I mean, from from 180 countries they collect this data, and we were marked at 140 in 2022, and now we are 133 in 2023, which is certainly encouraging, but not something to celebrate about, even if when it comes to perception of people. And there's another thing that I would like to highlight here, is that many of these organizations that work internationally, and I respect them because they give a perspective, they bring to us a certain kind of information and knowledge. But as Dr. Niaz Murtaza has rightly pointed out, that it is not an experiential index, it is a perception index. So there may be a lot of corruption happening. For instance, if you look at the international, some of these European countries who are at the top, or some of the other Western countries or Far Eastern countries who have who have scored much better than the developing countries, I think they are the drivers of corruption in the third world. The transnational companies, the unregulation for which the local elites, the unregulated practices rather, for which the local elites partner with them. So you can't really, it's kind of very difficult for me as a student, as a minor student of global affairs, that how can you say that France is less corrupt than a French colony in Rwanda, for instance, when the whole treasury of Rwanda, which is a former French colony, the national treasury of Rwanda is actually controlled by the French. And the French transnational companies, or the French companies who work transnationally, are a part of what is happening in Rwanda. So it is something that bothers me a little.
Right. Dr. Nasir Iqbal, what's your understanding when you talk about this, the significance of this particular corruption perception index?
I think first of all we should say that it's a good news for Pakistan in terms of ranking. I agree with Dr. Niaz and also picks up about the perception and the quantification of this index, though it's not quantified in a way that we should, but perception also matters. When there is improvement in terms of perception, how the investor take decision. They take decision based on these indices, especially if we are looking for a global investment and we wanted to win the heart of the global investor, we have to improve the perception of the country as well. So this is a good starting point, and they highlighted couple of very important aspects of this whole nexus between corruption and justice system. We must acknowledge this nexus. They mentioned that the corruption have a very close relation with the justice system of the country. If you really have to improve your perception regarding corruption, you have to work on the justice system. And unfortunately, one of the key that contribute toward this perception about corruption in our system is the prevailing justice system. It is basically the behavior and the conduct of this judicial system and the judiciary in a way that it creates a sentiment toward the corruption. Then the second component that is important in terms of the perception is the way the procedures are defined in our public sector, because they capture mainly perception from the public sector and public sector employees, and also as mentioned that the MNCs and the other working globally as well as the multinational companies. So they have a close connection with all other sectors of the economy. So this perception really help us in terms of understanding the image of the country. We have to move, because this 133, though there is a significant improvement in terms of from 140 to 133, but still we are at the bottom of the list out of 180 countries, and if we compare with the other countries, those have a very good in terms of attracting investment. They have very good perception. So of course we can't measure exactly what is corruption is and how we can quantify. There are a number of ways. Even the public sector employees, those are not working full time, it's also a corruption, but that's not captured in this. Again, this gave one of the good indication for Pakistan, especially with the backing of, if we improve our justice system, definitely it will help to improve in the future as well.
When we talk about this CPI, there are two different elements to it. The scale that I already talked about, that is from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
Now 0 being towards
Yeah.
being more corrupt, and closer to being 100 to be more cleaner, right? So there, now when we talk about 133, that's the rank, that's the improvement in the rank. So what's the difference between that particular scale and this particular rank? How do we differentiate, and which one carries the more weight as compared to the other?
Basically they give a score to each country. Like the score ranges from 0 to 100. Like there are 180 countries globally where they conducted this survey, and each country assigned different score.
Okay.
For example, for Pakistan score is 27,
Right.
and for like India, if it's score like 28, 29, 40, whatever the score is, then they like just rank all those countries based on those
Okay,
scores.
so out of 100 countries, Pakistan is at 133 in
Yes.
terms of ranking.
Yes.
With 29 points.
Yes.
And there's an improvement from 27 to 29.
Yes.
So we are moving towards 100.
Yes.
Getting that improvement from 0 on that particular
So
scale.
if you look into the average of the global, as you mentioned, it's around 49. So we are far below from the global average in term of our score. But if we look into in term of the ranking, we are almost in the
So when
30
they talk about the Denmark in specific, that it tops the index for the 6th consecutive year, it stands at 90. What does that mean?
Yeah. It means they mentioned that they use 13 different sources to collect data, and each sources have a different indicator. Each indicator have a weight, like 0 to 10, 0 to 5, 0 to 20. Each indicator have a different weight. Then they sum up all the indicator and come up with the one score that they normalize between 0 to 100. If the Denmark score is 95, 97, it means they sum up all the indicator and their score is 95. And in case of Pakistan, they again sum up all the indicator and our score is 29. So again, criteria is same for all countries. The indicator are same.
Okay, so let's suppose if we compare the top country, that Denmark, that has 90 points, right? Pakistan is 29 points. So there is a gap between 90 to 29. Now, almost 61% to 61 points to be exact. What are those basic features that actually bring in such a huge contrast between two countries? I mean, what are those focus areas capitalizing on which Denmark can achieve 90 and Pakistan has to do work on those?
Let me give you the one example that will clarify. So for example, the efficient working of judiciary, that could be the one indicator. Its score between 0 to 10. 10 means the judiciary is working perfectly. 0 means it is like it's not working. So if our score is 3 and Denmark's score is 10, it means our judiciary's functioning is just like 30% of the global average, or the best practices in the world, but the score for Denmark is 10. So then it 10 added to the total score. Similarly, if we take the democracy, in case of democracy, if the score is 0 to 10, for autocratic regime or a corrupt democracy, we have a 0 score. For the fair democracy, we have a 10 score. It means the Denmark can avail 10 points in terms of if they have a fair democracy, but in our case, if our democracy is not well functioning, they are more inclined toward the autocratic type of regime, then our score probably between 1, 2 or maximum 3. Similarly, the World Bank have a different governance indicator that also do the same processes. Political stability is there, the corruption index is there. Similarly, the business environment also matter in terms of ease of doing. Similarly, the documentation also matters. For example, we are talking about the NOC culture in Pakistan. If you need to pay some bribe, that is a perception. If I have to get electricity connection, then I have to pay some bribe. This is a perception in my mind. Even if I couldn't pay, but still I have some perception that if I have to go for an electricity connection.
From the last year 2022, in 2023, it has of course improved.
Yes.
Because of that, the intervention by the government, the policies they have framed. Let me go once again back to Dr. Niaz Murtaza. Dr. Niaz Murtaza, now when we talk about Pakistan getting an improvement of 2 points and also the ranking of the 7 spots, the kind of things which have been mentioned by Justice Retired Zia Parvez, the chair of the Transparency International here in Pakistan, that this reflects on the anti-corruption efforts taken by different pillars of the state, due to which Pakistan has witnessed the improvement in CPI 2023. Your understanding of it, what were those key measures or the efforts put in by the key pillars of the state to get this particular improvement of 7 ranks?
Well, first thing is, as you were also saying, there are two things, our absolute score and then the rank. The more important thing is the rank, because, the absolute score, because the rank can change because of changes in other countries as well. So, for example, if their perceptions change more slowly compared to Pakistan, then our rank can, increase without our absolute score increasing at all. That can happen theoretically. But our absolute score has also changed by about 2 points. So that is also a good point. The other thing is that, perceptions, of course, make a difference, because, different, people who are looking to invest in Pakistan, they look at, what kind of, corruption issues will we face. And since this is the only measure, a lot of people look at that. So if there is an improvement, then yeah, perceptions sometimes are more important than reality. So some people will look at it. But 1 year is not going to make a change. If there is, say, a sustained improvement for several years, 3-4 years, and our rank keeps on improving, our score keeps on going, then there is a bigger chance that people will sit up and say, okay, the situation in Pakistan is improving and it's becoming a better place to invest in, and that can make a difference. But then it's also important, like we have a hadith which says that people who take bribery as well as who give bribery, both are corrupt. But this index, as Mr. Harris was saying, it only measures, the amount that people take. And, the taking happens in, the developing countries, but the giving happens from, the rich countries. So if there was a different index built which looked at both sides, the amount of bribery taken as well as the amount of bribery given, then, we might have very different situations, for example, countries from where, multinationals come in and give a lot of bribe in third world countries, or, encourage capital flight, then we might have a very different thing. But given all that, I think it's good. But unless we, keep up this momentum, then, the gains will be lost, because what we had was 3 years of back-to-back losses where, both our absolute score as well as rank slipped. And, oddly, that was under PTI, although, PTI speaks a lot about ending corruption. But in its 3 years, it ended well. Now, of course, it doesn't necessarily mean causality, because it's not just the executive. There's also, the judiciary and so many institutions involved. And perceptions, of course, are, slippery. They're subjective. So we can't really say that, it's necessarily tied to the performance of a government. But what is important is that, this is an encouragement. And when the new government comes in, it should take up the challenge to, sustain this change for the next 4 to 5 years, so that, at the international level, a certain momentum, a buzz is created about Pakistan as a place where things are improving.
Right, Mr. Khalique, you wanted to add something earlier. Please go ahead.
Well,
Otherwise,
yes. I think Dr. Niaz Murtaza is absolutely right that perception is more important than reality. But perception is more important than reality when people at large are making political choices. When an investor is making a business choice, reality is the only thing that matters. It is not perception.
So what?
And I think there's a bit of a connection, of course, because it is the political economy, and people make individual personal choices. But I think a business investment does not happen in a place until and unless a full sort of a proper investigation and assessment of the possibilities of creating more wealth out of that investment are not made.
So when we specifically talk about the stock market in particular, I'll take Dr. Nasir Iqbal's view on this also. Isn't it about perception in the market? That sometimes we see that bullish trend happening.
Well, stock,
and that
yeah.
also. So what about the other aspects of
Well,
economy also?
well, you see, I mean, that's not my forte, but I can still understand a little bit about how stock markets work. But Dr. Murtaza and Nasir Bhai are going to be, I mean, it's their forte. But stocks is all about, it's not just all about perception. There is a combination of perception as well as the government itself investing in the stock market. Sometimes this has also happened in Pakistan and other developing third world countries also. And stocks are not the only indicator, or I mean, it's not where any production is taking place. It's not where any fundamental agricultural or industrial growth is taking place. It's paper money, it's kind of perceptions, it's capital markets work in a very different way. And so people will make a lot of money one day and they will lose a lot of money one day. It's kind of a gambling that happens there. But it will not happen that a company is not making any profits at all and its shares or the dividends increase.
Right. For example,
so that does
if I am having a company, I'm interested to invest in Pakistan. Of course, your point is well taken that it will actually go in investigation into the real stuff, right? What kind of dividends it can actually get from there. But don't you think perception has to be at the very top of it? I'll consider a country with a better perception first as compared to a country with a bad perception.
I will consider a country, perception is an outcome of how you regulate your economy and how you are running your economy. Not just regulate, but how do you run your economy. So if the perception is that the ease of doing business in Pakistan is not there, so there's a basis for that, and it is a reality that there's no ease of doing business in Pakistan. So, and there are people, so they are not actually bothered by the commissions and the kickbacks. I mean, if you work with these companies and if you understand how they work, they are not bothered about commissions and kickbacks at all. But they are bothered about the possibility of making profits out of their investments, factoring in those commissions and kickbacks. In Pakistan, the problem is that people actually ask for commissions and kickbacks, but at the same time make it so difficult for the investor to, or a venture capitalist or an investor or an entrepreneur coming from somewhere else or even from within Pakistan. So it's easier to invest in in creating a housing society, a residential society in Pakistan than establishing an industrial unit. So because for establishing an industrial unit which gives a lot of employment and adds to the growth and the industrial production of the country, or for export, there are the kind of constricting regulations that are there with these people with their mouths open.
So there have been certain initiatives been brought in by the authorities recently, and the Special Investment Facilitation Council happens to be one of them. The problems that you've just mentioned over here. I'll come back to take your detailed view. Let me go to words Dr. Niaz Murtaza. Dr. Niaz Murtaza, as you already opined that it helps in increasing that particular sentiment, that positivity and that particular sentiment among the investors when there is an improvement in this particular index. So when we talk about the effect or impact of this particular index, keeping this in view, do the governments also change their policies to this particular index? Does it impact the policies also?
Of the countries that have been ranked poorly? Well, it's a fairly well-known index, and especially in Pakistan over the last few years, there has been such a high degree of sensitivity created around issues of corruption since Panama case came and everything, the change in government, etc. So it's become quite a sensitive issue in Pakistan, but then it's usually used as a political tool. Whenever under a government our score goes down, then the opposition pounces on it. But unfortunately, there is less analytical and critical and in-depth analysis of, looking at, all the sub-indexes in deeply, looking at, whether it's the judiciary whose score has gone down, the police whose score has gone down, and then finally, what kind of policies are needed. That is where, the real gap is. If they start looking at it at, the recommendations, because, it's not just the index. Transparency and its Pakistan offices also give a lot of, recommendations on how things could be improved. And if you look at them, they're all about long-term sustained effort that is required, rather than just, the politicization or the rhetoric about, ending corruption. So that kind of, sustained in-depth analysis is unfortunately missing. And I think now that we are having elections, a new government is coming in, I think it would be great if, they can look at these kind of issues. So far, going through, the various manifestos, I haven't seen, much emphasis from any party, even PTI, on, how they are going to tackle corruption, how they are going to improve the working of the different institutions which are, under the spotlight whenever there is a discussion of corruption. So it's that kind of a mindset that we really require.
Right, Dr. Niaz Murtaza, one last question from you. What it takes for a country like Pakistan, standing at 29 points, to reach or to try to reach at 90 points where Denmark stands for 6th consecutive year?
Well, 90 will only be, a very, very long-term thing for us. But what we should, aim for is to improve our standing within the region. So, you've talked about India being at 39. I think Sri Lanka is also around 35, 36, and so on. Bangladesh actually is below us, at least last year. I haven't checked this year. So I think the first aim should be to, actually stand up and improve within our region, and then, we can slowly rise through the ranks with, the other developing countries in Latin America, and then think about, reaching European standards.
Writer Dr. Niaz Murtaza, senior analyst, joining us on Skype. Thank you very much for being with us on this show tonight. Really appreciate that. Dr. Nasir Iqbal, now, the perception, as you already shed light quite comprehensively on, what about the policies by the authorities in a certain specific state keeping in view these indexes?
Yeah, basically when we talk about the perception of this corruption, it's not about like a financial corruption or bribery. It's a mix of all kind of policies those are working in your country. And we are talking about all those policies as Dr. Niaz mentioned, that the manifesto of the upcoming these political parties, especially related to the next tenure, they didn't talk about those reforms. As you mentioned, that how we can move from this 27 to 97, the only way forward is to reform the country, and the reforms in all sector of the economy, in our policies. Just I'll give you the couple of examples that will help you to understand the why we perceive the corruption is very high in our country. Whenever you start a business, you have to take so many NOCs. You have to take permission from various institutions. That basically create an environment of a corruption. Maybe it's not directly the bribery, maybe it's linked with the hurdle that they created in terms of giving you the permission, in terms of giving you the NOC, in terms of taking so many steps to complete from one part to the other part of the business. So all these ultimately come up with the perception that this country is a corrupt country. And the recent decline, to me, maybe there are other reasons, but the recent decline, currently we are struggling with so many other issues that dominate compared to the corruption. And in the previous regime, when the PTI was in the government, the corruption was at the forefront. So they talk about the corruption, they said we have to reduce the corruption. That's everyone thought about, we are the corrupt nation and we have to think about the corruption. But over the last 1.5 years, so the direction has changed toward the other key issues and key challenges that also undermine this concept of corruption, and maybe this slight increase in the perception toward a good type of indication that we are moving toward the better country may be linked with the way that we change the narrative of the country. So, as a way forward, as you mentioned, what are the policies? We have to think a complete overall of the country. So, as I talk in an earlier program in other at the PTV World as well, that we have to declare the next 2 to 5 years as a reform year. And PIDE has presented a very comprehensive reform package for the new government. They can take, they can debate on it, and we can also discuss with the different stakeholders how we can reform all those segments of the economy and come up with a country where Dr. Niaz said at least we can sit up the regions. Not maybe it's very difficult to compete the European country at the very short period of time, but at least we have to improve our perception within our region. And the success of any council, any SIFC, any investment plan depends on those perceptions.
So, when we talk about those hurdles that you've already mentioned that actually cause the delay when an investor is actually looking forward to invest in a certain specific country. So, what about SIFC? It actually provides that one window operation free from all that hassle that is required to obtain that permission and all those NOC to start investing.
Yeah, that's a good way. You know, the SIFC, what's the objective of SIFC? As you mentioned that create a one window operation, and they facilitated the investor to come up with investment. We will facilitate though. Our rules, our regulation will not create a hurdle or binding constraint in terms of establishing the business. So, it means the corruption is linked with the procedures, with the processes, with the NOCs. It's not a bribery, it's not a kickback, it's not a cash. It's all the procedure, all the documentation, all the NOCs. And SIFC is basically meant to reduce those costs in terms of documentation, in terms of NOC, in terms of other procedures. So, the way forward is also linked with these things. We have to reduce these administrative burden. We have to create an environment where people can easily start a business. Ease of doing business is one of the key component of this entire corruption perception, and so many other illness of the country is linked with the ease of doing business. So, we really have to think how we can improve all these processes, how we can facilitate and give a confidence to investors that this policy will remain intact. No one will change, even within the government, within the same tenure, every year we can change the policy, we can change the tax
I'll
rate.
come to this particular point, the thing that you've just mentioned, the continuity of policy, how crucial that one is, and what sort of a role does it play when it comes to this particular corruption perception index. Mr. Khalique, now the role of SIFC, as Dr. Nasir Iqbal has mentioned, that this corruption is primarily actually associated with the procedures and all those delays which are caused during those procedures, getting the permission and those NOCs. We know this grand initiative was launched recently, the Special Investment Facilitation Council, trying to overcome that particular problem that actually causes red tape and the delays. If anyone wants to come and invest in Pakistan, particularly the foreign investors, how do you look at that?
You see, we have examples of such councils and committees being formed earlier also. So, SIFC should see that what failed earlier, what was wrong, or what did not go right, to put it delicately, when similar committees were formed in past. You see, you can't just create another institution while keeping the same tax regimes, while keeping the same investment policies for the rest of the people. So, basically SIFC can be successful if it also creates similar possibilities for Pakistani entrepreneurs. And so, this can't happen that you have a 6-window operation, and it is not just procedural, I am afraid. It is not just, I mean, I agree with Dr. Saab that it is essentially procedural, but not just procedural. Because if you have 6 steps, not everybody is corrupt, not everybody is asking for a favor, but you increase the possibility of someone along the line in the chain to actually block it and create.
Isn't that what exactly SIFC addresses?
This is exactly what I'm saying. Operation. Yes, but then how can you have a one-window operation on an ad hoc basis? We need to change our laws and regulations and then SIFC can be very successful. But it has to, I mean, for example, the FBR reforms, the tax reforms in Pakistan, it's a lopsided regime. A salaried person, I mean, for instance, if you work in a company and get a good salary, you will be paying 35% of direct tax at source.
Yeah.
But if you are running a departmental store just opposite where this person lives, that departmental store is actually earning far more than this professional is earning, but paying far less or nothing at times, or peanuts. So this kind of lopsided structure has to change at a personal income tax level, but also for the corporations and for the companies to invest, and then creating, but at the same time not losing sight of the labor force and the rights of, when we are inviting investment, we don't want it to be like what happened in Baldia town. Factory fire, what happens in Bangladesh every other day, where there are no regulations for protecting the economic rights as well as the safety and security of our labor force. So there has to be these wider sort of dialogues and debates, and urgently what we can do is SIFC can actually take stock of what went wrong in the past when we so many schemes and so many committees we have come up with.
You already mentioned about Federal Board of Revenue. There is a restructuring.
But the Election Commission has stopped that just recently.
Okay, because of the mandate, the Election Commission of Pakistan says, but there has been a consensus on what the restructuring actually has been done. The Cabinet has already approved it. ECB, because of the mandate, perhaps
I think we have to.
It's going to be continued.
No, but we have to be a little critical, because we are, it's an internal issue that Pakistan is facing. Our bureaucracy is the continuity of a colonial system. So I think bureaucracy creates hurdles for anything that actually lessens their ability to exercise power. So the tax bureaucracy has to now understand that they are Pakistanis first and taxmen or beneficiaries of the bureaucratic system later. So that is something which is important. They must not stop reforms.
Right, Dr. Nasir Iqbal, where to start those reforms from? As you already mentioned, next 3 to 5 years should be the period for reforms and overhauling the entire system. Where to actually take that very drastic step? What should be the first stepping stone?
I think the first, I encourage all the political parties to read the PIDE Reform Manifesto. It's available at PIDE website. To me, the starting point is market reform. That could be the easiest way. If we talk about the reforms in civil service, if we talk about the reforms in judiciary, if we talk about the reform in democratic system, it might be difficult and there will be a interest involved in those reforms. But the easiest way, and that would be super important for us, is the next government should make this market reform as a top priority. That would be the starting point where there is a relatively, for me, the relatively less resistance from all the stakeholders, because at this point in time, all stakeholders has realized that the market would be the only way forward for us. We have to create a ease in our market. We have to develop a markets. We have to create a competitive environment where everyone can compete. They rightly mentioned that it's not about the foreign investor, it's also important for the domestic investor, how we can create an environment of confidence among our own investors. So the success, it depends on the perception of the policies, continuity of the policies, how we can manage and how we can facilitate in a way that all sector of the economy should be equally benefit. It's not about the one specific sector where we can give advantage to either automobile sector, either textile sector, through subsidies.
Selective subsidies.
It's about giving an opportunity to everyone. Come up with a business plan. Do your own business. There is no need of NOC.
Your point is well taken. Dr. Nasir Iqbal, your last quick comment regarding as to how crucial accountability and bringing those people who are involved in corruption to justice is.
For me, we have to remove this word corruption. So we have to think about the causes that stem or that cause these corruption. These are the procedures, these are the NOCs. these are the restrictions, these are the rules. We have to eliminate, we have to create ease in all those procedures, all those steps. That ultimately would be the starting point, and definitely within the 3 to 5 years, you can imagine that this will revitalize your economy. It will ease your debt burden as well.
Right, Mr. Haris Khalique, now this court, Transparency International, calls on the governments to give justice systems the independence, resources and transparency needed to effectively punish all corruption offences and provide checks and balances on power. How crucial is that? And what should be done here in specific, your last closing comments?
It's actually the first thing that we should be looking at. Because if I may recall, I do not like Sir Winston Churchill as a politician, but I like him as a wit, and I like him as a parliamentarian. And he said when during the war, the Second World War, somebody said that, you know, the country is falling apart. He said, if our courts are functioning, then England is functioning, or the UK is functioning. So I think that is fundamental, and I completely agree with the observation that Transparency International has made about the justice systems, because justice systems ensure that there is more equity, there is everybody is the same in the eyes of the law, and the elite capture in any country is only possible if it has a lopsided or a weak or a corrupt justice system. And I think we have to fight that.
Mr. Haris Khalique, Senior Analyst, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. And Dr. Nasir Iqbal, Head Macro Policy Lab at Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Thank you very much for your time. Also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.